Hoy estamos festejando, celebrando. ¿Por qué? Porque no hay nada probablemente más exquisito que aprender y que las ideas se lleven a la acción y cuestionar. Y si hay una mente crítica, una leyenda viviente, un pensador universal, se llama Noam Chomsky. Podemos estar a favor o en contra de muchas de sus opiniones, desde la lingüística hasta la geopolítica, desde la antropología hasta la etología, un filósofo completo. Este señor, este gran pensador, es sin duda una de las tres personas más citadas en la era contemporánea intelectual. Como ustedes saben, es un profesor universal de MIT. Él puede dar clases en la Escuela de Historia y en la Escuela de Economía. Noam Chomsky, it's a great, great honor to have you in our program. Thank you very much to be here in the program Upside Down.
Very pleased to be with you.
And the last time we saw you was at Ciudad de las Ideas with our friends Lawrence Krauss talking about science and talking about philosophy and geopolitics. Today, if it is okay for you first, if you could introduce yourself with your own words, how do you define Noam Chomsky, which it's not easy. I can bet that it will take us 5 hours to talk about that, but a little bit, and then if we could talk a little bit about your inner, deeper thoughts and also about what's going on today in the world. Welcome to your program. Elaborate, who are you?
I'll elaborate very briefly. The brain, fortunately, has two hemispheres. And if no neuroscientists are listening and don't want the distortion, metaphorically, one of the hemispheres is devoted to linguistics, philosophy, intellectual history, science, so on. The other hemisphere is devoted to affairs of this sad and troubled world. And both of them function simultaneously and at a pretty intense pace. And then, of course, beyond that, there's life.
And actually, you say it very well. Describe it metaphorically. We will keep talking a little bit of whatever you wish about your personal thinking and life. And based on that, I would like to start with some questions. How is a day of Noam Chomsky? Every day is different. Which is your favorite place in your home? What's most of the time? Are you by yourself, with other people? If you could share a little bit about your inner life and space, we will appreciate it very much.
Well, actually, I'm a very private person, and I keep my inner life to myself, to my wife, Valeria, It's a little hard for me to describe because if I say the wrong words, the fauna in the neighborhood will react in ways that I don't want them to. So I have a couple of dogs, play with them.
It's very difficult probably to ask you, but which are like the thinkers that have much more influence in today, in your work, in your life?
Well, actually, to be precise, those who have most influence are the younger people I'm working with. We interact, interchange, have lively sessions, meet virtually, of course, all over the world, regularly interchange, lots of exciting developments in our own fields and disciplines. So that's one kind of influence. The other kind of influence are, for example, the people demonstrating in the remarkable Black Lives Movement demonstration, or the young people who are involved in climate action, and many others like them. Those are the people who are influential. Of course, there are many great thinkers, thousands of years, whose works are instructive, inspiring. But if you want an accurate statement, the real influences are what I just mentioned.
Wow. Going now a little bit to geopolitics. I mean, everybody knows or should know that Noam Chomsky it's a person that have made many revolutions intellectually, starting with linguistics and understanding and provoking what many people never imagined, that we have like, in a way, an innate way to learn languages and to learn how to speak. And there is like, in a Kantian way, a grammar thing with our lives. And with that time, it was very provocative, but then it was proved. And he changed the way to understand many things. But following that line, Professor Chomsky, it has to do with education. My first question will have to do with that. What changes would you like to see in the educational system? Because it has to do with many other works that you've been working around.
Well, the last several decades, roughly the neoliberal period, have seen a significant attack on the educational system as part of the general neoliberal framework in many dimensions. The one is simply defunding. Public schools are, I'm speaking mainly of the United States, but it's different in other countries. Public schools have been defunded, an effort to try to basically destroy them in line with the neoliberal ideal that was expressed by Ronald Reagan when he came into office. Government is the problem. We have to get rid of government. What that means is we have to take decisions away from government, which is partially responsive to citizens, and put them in the hands of completely unaccountable private institutions, which are directed by greed, as his economics guru, Milton Friedman, explained. And that's what we've been living with for 40 years, with very harmful consequences for most of the population. But in education, it means that in the United States, which is a leader in this movement, England as well, others to some extent, the schools have simply been defunded. So states do not fund state colleges. Public education funding is reduced. 50 kids in a classroom who haven't had breakfast for the morning because that's the way neoliberal programs work. So a classroom in elementary school becomes mostly a disciplinary problem. Okay, that's by design. Now, there's another element to this. It's called training to test. The worst conceivable form of education is being made the ideal. Democrats and Republicans, Obama pushed it too. So children have to be in school, have to be trained to pass the next exam. We've all had experiences like this. I'm sure you have. You take some course that you have no interest in, you study for the exam, you pass it, maybe with flying colors. 2 weeks later, you forgot what the course is about. In the 18th century, this was ridiculed by Enlightenment thinkers with the image of pouring the water into a vessel, and a very leaky vessel. That's the worst kind of education, they argued, and that's the kind of education that fits the neoliberal framework to create passive, obedient, atomized consumers who don't participate in what's not their business, like the affairs of the world. And it's had an effect. In the universities, what this has meant, not only defunding, but also imposing a business model. So lots of administrators, deans, sub-deans, very highly paid because management salaries have gone through the roof, and decisions more and more taken away from the family. On a business model, you try to get the cheapest labor you can. And of course, at the university, that means not tenured professors who have worked all their lives on the topics, but rather adjuncts who you can pay almost nothing to, have no defense. You can throw them out. Graduate students who are basically unprotected. So shift teaching and other responsibilities to them. That saves money. And from a business point of view, that's what you're supposed to do. Actually, the same models are used elsewhere. One of the reasons why COVID-19 is such a disaster in the United States, to a lesser extent in England, is that they've gone to the limit in imposing business models. So in the United States, the hospital system, of course, there's no general health insurance. The United States is off the international spectrum on that. But that's also the result of a business-run society. But the business model in the hospitals means what's called in the business world just-on-time delivery, no wasted resources. So if you're running an automobile plant, you set it up so that everything works instantaneously, no extra resources in case something goes wrong. Doesn't matter that much. If the assembly line stops, you can wait a little and fix it up. But in hospitals, what it means is no spare capacity, no extra beds, no extra diagnostic facilities, just exactly enough so that under normal circumstances, you'll be able to operate. I should say that normal circumstances are pretty bad in a health system which is business run. You go to a major U.S. hospital, like the best hospitals in Boston, great shortage of nurses, but plenty of desks with people working on computers to figure out which insurance company is going to not pay something for this and that procedure because they found something in the small print that doesn't cover it. So plenty of that, but shortage of medical care. Excellent medical care, incidentally. So the technology is very high. If you can afford it, you can doing fine. Actually, contrary to what people believe, the United States actually does have universal health care. It's called emergency rooms. If you can somehow drag yourself to an emergency room, they are obligated to take care of you. You may wait a couple of days if it's not very serious. You may get expert care. It's the most savage, cruel, expensive form of universal health care that exists. But it fits the business model. It's the way to make profits, to get management salaries high, and the same in education. So yes, it's been suffering. There are very good models that can be used and are being used by people all the way from elementary school to the universities to break out of this system. So I could give you examples if there's time, but very imaginative programs that try to do what schools are supposed to do: encourage children's natural curiosity, encourage them and help them to pursue their own interests cooperatively with others, all the way up to the university level. At the university where I spent most of my life, MIT, one of the great physicists was famous for telling his freshman courses in physics when they asked him, what are we going to cover this year? He would say, it doesn't matter what we cover, it matters what you discover. That's what learning is, learning how to learn pursue and develop your interests. So from kindergarten to graduate school, that can be done, but it's a battle against the business-run society, which has moved to an extreme under the neoliberal programs, with all the effects that this has on the educational system.
On the other hand, this idea of the model of funding, of money, of capitalism besides the universities, I would like to make your question, and then on the other part of profits. Bernie Sanders, probably I'm wrong, you know, much more than, probably not only than me, but much more than most of the people in all these topics. But I think Bernie Sanders, in a way, was pushing the agenda of what you just mentioned about funding. Do you think that there was like a, I don't know, based on your work of consent, of manufacturing consent and all these things, that the New York Times, even CNN and all these media groups tried not, or the system itself tried not to help Bernie Sanders to win the elections, to become the candidate of the Democratic Party because particular specific reason, but he had, I think so, what you have in mind in the agenda of funding universities. What happened? What's your idea of what happened there, actually?
Bernie Sanders, no support from the rich or the corporate sector, practically no funding. As you said, the media strongly opposed to him. Nevertheless, he broke through with public support, virtually won the nomination. Probably could have won it if it hadn't been for party managers' manipulations. But anyway, very close. That's an enormous breakthrough. And it's not just that. He shifted what is sometimes called the Overton window, the range of topics that are discussed and debated and moved to legislation. He shifted that well to the progressive side. Things that are right at the heart of discussion now couldn't even be mentioned or were ridiculed a couple of years ago. Some of them of crucial importance for human survival, like a Green New Deal. We're in a very dangerous moment of threatened environmental catastrophe. And unless some form of Green New Deal is implemented, we're basically finished. That was nowhere near the legislative agenda before the Sanders campaign. Now it's right there. They're fighting against it. Republicans are radically opposed to it. They are a party of extreme denialists. You may have heard Trump a few days ago in California when he visited to take a look at the wildfires that are raging all over the West. And he assured people in California that there's no problem, has nothing to do with global warming. Furthermore, the world is going to cool, he assured them. And when he was informed that the scientists say the opposite, he said, scientists don't know yet, but he knows. So the world's going to cool, so don't worry about it. You turn on Fox News, which is a Trump echo chamber. That's repeated and so on. You listen to Rush Limbaugh telling his 30 million radio listeners, science is a hoax. He says there are four corners of deceit in the world, in the United States: academia, government, media, and science. They all live on deceit. So listen to your dear leader who says everything's fine, when almost half the population has that poured into their eyes and ears daily, over and over again.
Thank you very much, Professor Chomsky. And I recommend everybody your last book about climate crisis and the global Green New Deal. Of course, climate change is probably one of the biggest challenges that we as a world, as a planet together, are facing now. Is there any other risk that you would like to bring to the table in this program that we have also to be aware, because it's extremely important what you have been mentioning about climate change? Is there any other risk that if we could change something, we can work on it?
Very definitely. Environmental catastrophe is only one existential crisis that the human species faces for the first time in its history. There's another, equally dangerous, maybe more dangerous. That's the growing threat of nuclear war. It's not just my opinion. It's the opinion of just about every specialist on the topic. So take William Perry, a conservative, sober analyst, not given to exaggeration, former defense secretary, has been involved at the top level in nuclear war issues all his life. And he just wrote a recent book in which he repeats what he's been saying. He says he's terrified, in fact, doubly terrified. One, by the growing threat of nuclear war, which he estimates as being higher than during the Cold War, and second, by the fact that nobody's paying attention to it. So we have just gone through two quadrennial extravaganzas, the presidential conventions, not one word about it, and virtually nothing about global warming, nothing about the threat of nuclear war. I'll mention another source which we should all be looking at and should know about, the famous doomsday clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. It's an analysis every January of the state of the world by expert scientists, political analysts, gives a succinct analysis in the setting of a clock. How far is the minute hand from midnight? Midnight means nice to know you, say goodbye, we're done. How far are we from midnight? It was set shortly after the first atom bomb. At that point, 7 minutes to midnight. Oscillated over the years. Every year that Trump has been in office, it has been moved closer to midnight. 2 years ago, it reached the closest point it has ever been to midnight. This January, the analysts abandoned minutes. It's much too dangerous. They moved to seconds. It's now 100 seconds to midnight. Since January, Trump has made it worse in every respect. Climate change, opening up new vast areas for fossil fuel exploitation, eliminating the regulations which somehow mitigate the extent of the crisis. Nuclear war, he has continued and practically completed his campaign to totally destroy the arms control regime, which has been meticulously constructed since Eisenhower, including Reagan, others, to try to protect the world from disaster.
Professor Chomsky, it's too sad that we don't have enough time to keep talking. Actually, I want to ask you, because I agree with you, the problems that we have in terms of distribution of many areas of giving equal opportunity to all the people in terms of inclusivity for prosperity, in terms of health, education, etc. And one day, in another occasion, I would love to talk with you about how can we create wealth in another kind of model. How can we create wealth then to actually give access to all these people? But given the fact of the timing, we will keep with this important thing about the clock that actually our friend Lawrence Krauss every year, it's part or have been part, I think last year was an exception, of how close we are to this terrible situation that climate change, the problem of democracy and nuclear weapons are a big challenge to us. What I would love to tell you and want to tell you, first of all, is gratitude. We always learn from you. You provoke us, and each of your work counts, each of your letters. And thank you very much to have that time to be with us. It's a great honor to have you, and wishing you the best. And as always, as I mentioned to you at Ciudad de las Ideas, it's an honor to have the chance to share with you your opinion, your thinking, and your generosity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Muchas gracias.
Bye.
Señoras y señores, desafortunadamente se nos acaba el tiempo. Con Chomsky necesitamos no media hora, muchas horas. Quedan muchas preguntas en el tablero. Estamos de acuerdo en que todo el mundo debe tener igualdades ante las instituciones y, por supuesto, ante la ley. Sin embargo, qué complejidad, qué sistema que no sea el que él critica puede generar la riqueza. Por otro lado, fundamental entender que hay capacidad de revolucionar los sistemas educativos y entender que no debemos estar atentos a un sistema educativo del siglo XVIII que nos hace ser una serie, como en la época T de los Fords, hechos para el mercado laboral, sino que el sistema educativo debe estar hecho no para pasar pruebas, sino para aprender a pensar. No para cubrir materias, cover, sino para descubrirlas, discover. Y por supuesto, el latente problema que se bifurca por el cambio climático que hemos negado y por cualquier amenaza, por un lado a la democracia y por el otro, de que en cualquier momento pueda haber una guerra nuclear. Esos son los grandes riesgos que confrontamos en la humanidad. Reitero, podemos estar a favor o en contra de muchas de las opiniones de Chomsky, pero lo que nadie puede poner en duda es la influencia que pone en la agenda mundial y la capacidad para analizar dichos temas. Muchísimas gracias. Quédese con nosotros en ADN 40. Nos vemos el próximo domingo. Pase un extraordinario domingo. Muchas gracias.